The gravy boat was hot against my palms, steam curling up past my wrists, when my father set his fork down so hard it rang against the plate. "She's not my daughter," he said. Flat, final, like he was reading a line off a form. The room didn't gasp, it just stopped. My stepmother's hand froze halfway to the cranberry sauce. My niece's fork hung in the air over the stuffing. And Mia, my sister 26 years old, sitting there in the green sweater grandma had knitted her, went the color of the tablecloth. "I'm Rachel, I'm 41. And it cost me almost everything I thought I understood about my family to finally hear what my father was actually saying that day, underneath the words he chose. If you've ever sat at a table and watched people you love become strangers in real time, stay with me. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do before we get into it. I work as a document conservator. 20 years of it. I spend my days with a magnifying loupe and cotton gloves, looking at things other people have thrown away or forgotten. Old letters, deeds, photographs with the backs written on. I read paper the way other people read faces. The weight of the stock, the bleed of the ink, where a page has been folded and refolded so many times it's about to give it the crease. I can tell you when a signature was added later, in a different hand, on the same page as an older one. It is a strange thing to be good at. It did not prepare me for what my own family was hiding. Or maybe it did. Maybe it was the only thing that could have. Let me back up. Thanksgiving at my dad's house had a rhythm to it that hadn't changed in 15 years. My father, Walt, 68, would carve the turkey standing up because he said sitting made his hands unsteady. Carol, his wife of 18 years, my stepmother, though none of us used that word anymore, would set out her mother's china, the pattern with the thin gold rim, and remind everyone twice not to stack the plates. And Mia, Carol's daughter from her first marriage, would show up early to help, because Mia always showed up early. She was the one who refilled water glasses without being asked. She was the one who remembered that Uncle Denny didn't eat pork. She had spent her whole adult life, as far as I could tell, trying to make herself indispensable to a family she'd been folded into at 8 years old. I want to be honest about something, because the golden rule of telling a story right is that you tell your own part of it too. I did not make that easy for her. Not once, not dramatically, but in 100 small withholdings over 18 years. I never called her my sister to other people. I called her my dad's wife's daughter, which is a mouthful designed to keep distance in it. When she was 19 and going through something hard, I won't get into what, it's hers to tell, not mine. I let 3 weeks go by before I called her back. I told myself I was busy. I wasn't busy. I was protecting a spot at the table that nobody had actually asked me to defend. So when my father said what he said, some ugly, embarrassing sliver of me, for about 1 second, less than a second, felt something that was almost relief. Like a wall I hadn't built on purpose had just been built for me. I'm not proud of that second. I think about it more than almost anything else in this story. But then I looked at Mia's face. She wasn't confused. That was the thing that got me. If this had come out of nowhere, she'd have looked confused. Instead, she looked like someone hearing a rumor about herself confirmed out loud for the first time. Like she'd always known and had just been waiting for years to find out if it was true. "Walt," Carol's voice was very quiet. "What did you just say?" My father looked down at his plate like the tablecloth might explain itself to him. "I said what I said." "Dad," I heard my own voice from far away. "What is wrong with you?" He didn't answer. He got up. And he did something I will remember until the day I die. He folded his napkin neatly in thirds, and set it beside his plate like he was leaving a restaurant. Then he walked out to the garage, and we heard his truck start, and he was gone. And 11 people sat in that dining room with a turkey nobody was going to eat, and no idea what had just happened to them. Carol didn't cry in front of everyone. She's not a person who does that. She just stood up, very steadily, and started clearing plates that still had food on them. And Mia sat there with her hands in her lap staring at a spot on the tablecloth like it was the only solid thing left in the room. I want to tell you about the truck first, because it matters later. It was parked crooked in the driveway when he left, half on the grass. The same truck he'd had for 11 years. The one Grandma used to call that ridiculous thing, because it was too big for him to park properly in his own garage. I noticed it because I was standing at the window. And because noticing details is what I do, even when, especially when, I don't want to be noticing anything at all. That night I drove to Grandma's house. She had died 6 weeks earlier. My father's mother, Eleanor, 91 years old, sharp until the very end in a way that made losing her feel almost like an insult. Like death had cheated to get her. The house was still full of her things because none of us had had the heart to start going through it yet. I went there because I didn't know where else to put myself, and because 2 days before she died, when she was too tired to talk much anymore, she'd gripped my wrist with more strength than I expected and said, "The box in the hall closet. Top shelf. It's yours to open, not your father's." Yours. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. People say strange, urgent things at the end. But I stood in her front hall that night with the porch light buzzing and I thought, that's exactly what she said. Yours, not his. The box was an old shoebox. The cardboard soft at the corners, tied with a length of blue ribbon that had gone slightly gray. Inside were photographs I'd never seen, a rosary. A stack of letters bound with a rubber band that had lost most of its stretch, and near the bottom, folded into quarters and gone brittle along the folds. A document that made my hands go still the way they only do at work when I've found something I wasn't supposed to find. It was an adoption record. Cook County, 1958. The adopting parents were Eleanor and Harold, my grandparents. The child was a boy 4 months old and his new name, written in my grandmother's careful cursive on a line meant for it, was Walter. My father was adopted. My father had been adopted his entire life and, as far as I could tell from every letter in that box, had never once been told. I sat on my grandmother's kitchen floor at 11 at night, and read those letters twice through before I understood what I was actually looking at. Eleanor and Harold had lost a baby in childbirth in 1957. The letters, from Eleanor's sister mostly, talked around it the way people did back then, in half sentences, but the shape of the grief was unmistakable. Then, 5 months later, Walt. There was a letter from Harold to his own brother that I read 3 times, because I couldn't quite believe a man from that generation had written it down at all. Eleanor says we are not to speak of it. She says a boy should never wonder if he was chosen or if he was settled for. I think she is wrong. I think a boy should know he was chosen on purpose. But it is not my decision to make alone, and so I will keep her silence, and I hope God forgives us both for it. They never told him. Not when he was young. Not when Harold died. Not, apparently, ever, because there was a final letter in the box, dated only 8 weeks before Grandma's own death. That she'd written and never sent. It was addressed to my father. In it, in handwriting shakier than the rest, she'd finally tried to say it. I'm not going to read you the whole letter. Some things belong to the people who wrote them, and the people they were written for. And I've already given you more than Grandma probably would have wanted a stranger to hear. But there was one line in it, near the end, that I have not been able to stop hearing since the night I read it. She wrote, "I only wanted you to feel like mine so completely that it would never once occur to you to wonder." That's the sentence. That's the one this whole story turns on. She protected him from a question by making sure he never knew there was one to ask. And in doing that, she left him standing on ground he didn't know was borrowed. For 68 years, until something cracked it open from underneath without warning. I didn't know yet what had cracked it. But I had a guess. And the guess kept me up most of that night. The next morning I called my Aunt Denise. Grandma's younger sister, 83. The last person alive who'd actually lived through 1958 as an adult. I didn't tell her what I'd found. I just asked her, carefully, if anything had happened recently, anything at all. That might have unsettled my father. She went quiet on the phone for long enough that I knew the answer before she gave it to me. He found his birth certificate, she finally said. The real one, going through some paperwork for his hip surgery. If you can believe that, needed his birth certificate for the pre-op paperwork and went digging in Eleanor's file box instead of his own, since his was in storage. Found the original. Not the amended one with Eleanor and Harold's names on it. The real one, from Cook County, with a mother's name on it he'd never heard before in his life. She paused. She called me. 3 weeks ago. He was, "Rachel honey, I have never heard your father sound like that. Like a man who'd been told the floor under him was actually a stage. 3 weeks ago." Which meant he had been carrying this, alone, silent, unprocessed, for the entire time leading up to Thanksgiving. A man who had spent 68 years believing he was simply unremarkably his parents' son had just discovered he'd been chosen, and installed, and never told, and rather than sit with that, rather than say a single word about it to a single living person who might have helped him carry it. He had walked into a dining room full of people who loved him, and pointed the wound at the person sitting closest to him who wasn't, on paper, entirely his either. I don't think my father hated Mia. I want to be clear about that, because I think it would be easy to tell this story as though he did, and it wouldn't be true, and it wouldn't be fair. I think my father, for one terrible unguarded second at that table, looked at the one person in the room who joined the family the way he now knew he had. Not born into it, brought into it, and instead of feeling kinship, he felt the exact thing he'd spent 3 weeks refusing to feel about himself. And it came out of him sideways. Aimed at the wrong person, the way pain does when nobody's taught you where to put it. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of it, as close as I can get to it. I drove to his house that afternoon. Carol let me in without a word and went to sit with Mia in the kitchen, and I found my father in the garage. Standing next to that crooked, parked truck, not doing anything to it, just standing there with his hand flat on the hood like he was checking it for a fever. I didn't yell. I want you to understand that, because I know how this kind of scene usually goes in the stories people tell. The shouting, the door slamming, somebody breaking down in the driveway. That's not what happened, and I think if it had happened that way, nothing would have actually changed. My father is a man who has spent his whole life not being yelled at. Not because people were scared of him, but because there was never anything underneath him solid enough to survive being shaken. Yelling would have just given him something to survive. I didn't want to give him that. I set Grandma's shoebox down on the workbench next to him, and I took out the adoption paper, and I set it on top, and I didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at it. I watched him understand what it was before I said a single word, watched the color leave his face the exact way it had left Maya's the night before. She never told you, I said, not once, not even at the end. She wrote you a letter and she never sent it. I have it. You can read it whenever you're ready and not 1 second before. He didn't touch the paper. His hand was still flat on the hood of the truck, like he needed it there to stay upright. You spent 3 weeks finding out you were chosen, I said, and you used it to make Mia feel unchosen. That's the part I need you to hear, not the paper. That was it. That was the whole climax of 18 years of quiet family architecture coming down. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just 2 sentences in a cold garage. And my father standing very still with his hand on a truck that had never quite fit in that space, the way he'd apparently never quite let himself believe he fit in his own life. He didn't answer me. But he closed his eyes, and I watched something go out of him that I think had been rigid in his shoulders for 3 straight weeks. Maybe longer than that, maybe his whole life, and Aunt Denise, who'd driven over without my asking her to. Who'd been standing quietly in the garage doorway the entire time without either of us noticing. She was the one who said the thing that actually landed. Alina loved you so much she made a mistake most people never get caught making. She said. She loved you into silence instead of loving you into the truth. That's not nothing, Walt. But it's not nothing to fix either. She wasn't trying to be the hero of that moment. She'd have told you the same thing herself. She was just the one who'd actually lived through it. The one who could say what was true without needing to be forgiven or thanked for saying it. She was just the person in the room who'd remember it correctly, later. When the rest of us were still deciding how to feel. What happened after wasn't cinematic, and I think that's the honest way to tell it. My father went into the kitchen and he sat down across from Mia, and he did not perform an apology. He doesn't have that gear, never has. But he told her plainly what he'd found in his own paperwork 3 weeks earlier, and what it had done to him, and that none of it was hers to carry, and that he was sorry in the specific way that means you understand exactly what you broke instead of just that you broke something. Mia cried. Carol cried. I stood in the doorway and didn't, because somebody in my family has always had to be the one holding the folder, and old habits are old habits. It's been 4 months. My father and Mia are not fixed the way you fix a leaky faucet, done and dry. They're better the way a bone is better after it's been properly set instead of just wrapped. Still tender, still needs care, but healing straight instead of crooked. He calls her now. Not often, but more than he ever did before, and always about something small and real. Asking how her new job's going, whether her car's still making that noise. Carol and I talk more too. which surprised me more than almost anything else in this whole story. I called her back within the hour now, the 2 times she's needed something since. I don't let 3 weeks go by anymore. I don't think I get credit for that. I think I just finally noticed I'd been doing it. My father read Grandma's letter alone, in his truck. In her driveway 3 days after Thanksgiving. He's never told me exactly what it said to feel, reading it. He didn't have to. I saw his face when he came back inside. And it was the face of a man setting something down, that he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had weight. I think about my grandmother a lot these days, more gently than I expected to. She wasn't wrong to love him so completely. She was wrong about what that love needed to survive. She thought the truth would loosen his grip on his own life, and instead the secret was the thing that finally did that, 68 years later. In a dining room over a turkey nobody ate. Love doesn't come with a blood requirement attached to it, and it never needed the silence to make it real. It just took us all a long, expensive road to actually believe that, instead of just saying it at Thanksgiving like it was easy. There's a shoebox on my own closet shelf now, blue ribbon retied. Everything back inside it except one folded page my father keeps in his truck. I don't know what I'll do with it yet, maybe nothing. Maybe I'll just keep it the way Grandma kept it. Safe and waiting and honest, this time, about what it is. If somebody in your family has ever said something at a table that cracked the whole room open, I'd like to hear how you found your way back from it. Put it in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this kind of story is the kind you needed tonight, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next table.